Mordhau is deep and acutely presented in its art style, combat, and attention to detail in the weapons, armor, semantics, and level design. However, whilst the framework is exceptional, the core gameplay loop is inherently flawed in both its originality and its intrinsic motivations regarding its player base, as well as their complete disregard for the longevity of their product. Mordhau is a game composed by Triternion, a developer dipping its hand in the first-person hack-and-slash genre with a heavy focus on massive battles and feint spamming. The game has an assortment of dozens of historical weapons and armor pieces, and successfully encapsulates the audience with its large and surreal locations carefully crafted with the game's unique art style. However, this game has been out for a full year at the time of recording. The player numbers are seemingly decreasing while some of its competition is increasing. Mordhau is an amazing game built on a brilliant foundation, however it leaves a lot to be desired, at least from me personally, and I'll get on to what momentarily. The game has a drastic emphasis on the customization of characters too, bestowing its players with dozens of unique and customizable weapons and armor. Although the character creation itself lacks a lot of diversity, with about as many options as the typical Ubisoft titles and the Destiny games. Though it must be said, it is very rare to see players that look the same as you. There is enough diversity to create an original character that you may even get attached to. Personally, my favourite character that I made myself is Polemarch Pete, equipped with his bardish long weapon and heavy armour, capable of surviving anything the world can throw at him, besides a couple of arrows and a mace, of course. The weapons seem relatively balanced, however this can be seen as not the case due to the battlefield presence of some of the weapons. For example, fighting an enemy team with 5 or so archers, all of which firing an arrow every 3 seconds can seem like an absolute unstoppable wave of fire, and can appear as completely broken and overpowered. But again, I don't think we can talk about the balance of the game without talking about the strategies seen profusely throughout your time in the game. In the game there are 4 types of players. They are as follows. The rapier stabbers, players who use the fast rapier and stab constantly, often chopping up a team in seconds if nobody manages to get a quick swing or a chamber in before your team is lying on the ground churning their blood-curdling screams before bleeding out without a care in the world. The second type of player strictly uses heavy weapons and spams feints, causing you to parry early every time unless you have over 100 hours in the game, where you can finally identify the disparity of the patterns between a dedicated swing and a feint. This type of player seems to be the most common and is easily the most annoying thing to fight against as a low-leveled player. The third type of player strictly uses a bow and arrow and a dagger, sitting on top of buildings where no other player can reach and rain down upon those pesky peasants in their heavy armor. The final type of player is like me, learning the weapons, bringing only basic knowledge from games like Chivalry, For Honor, and the like. The gameplay loop is quite fun unless you like having strategic sword fights between another player, because that is simply not found here. You can be having a sparring match with someone, getting intensely into the battle, and then another player will either come up behind yourself or your foe and quickly killing them, ending what was once a fun battle. There is never a feeling of success in this game. The closest thing you can find are dedicated 1v1 servers that is not part of the base game, but a custom game mode that players are paying for. To me, it's almost criminal. A game with such depth in terms of medieval combat and not having a mode where you can 1v1 players or criminally even host a custom game without coughing up money is, in my opinion, absolutely profound. Everybody has to live off of 48 player dedicated servers and paid private servers. The repetitive nature of these dedicated servers running into battle trying to get a quote-unquote sick feed is unbelievably monotonous for a tactical and strategic player like myself. But I haven't even talked about the worst part of the core gameplay loop yet. The worst part of the gameplay loop is undoubtedly the horses. The one-shotting out of nowhere tank capable of annihilating myriads of people is easily the most boring part of the game. Fighting against a horde of foot soldiers can sometimes be intense, but it seems so redundant when a single horse can trample your entire army and a horse rider can cut down any foe in its path. Only heavy weapons can easily take down the horse, and even when that happens, the cavalry unit has already likely killed half of your army, which is a lot for this medieval fighter. The core gameplay loop is simply and undoubtedly atrocious in this game. The community of this game is also worthy of its own segment, seeing as griefing is commonplace in this game. Players healing enemies, walling their team into spawn, kicking team members into spikes, causing team damage, and even purposely trampling players with a horse or firing upon friendlies with catapults has been seen in more games than it hasn't. There are also other things that are slightly rarer in my experience, but are still commonplace, such as friendlies placing bear traps at spawn, throwing firebombs into the spawn, etc. The player base is by far the most toxic I have experienced out of any game, and I think we should all be thankful that there is no in-game voice chat incorporated within the game. Another aspect of the game that is amazing, however leaves a lot to be desired, are the maps, or lack thereof. The maps included in the game are quite large and visually appealing, however there are only 8 maps for the most popular playlists, and even then there are at most 12. Despite the relatively decent number of maps, only 4 traditionally get played due to favoritism amongst the experienced players. The severe lack of maps gets quite boring. Your first few matches are extremely immersive, but the amazement quickly ends once you experience all the game has to offer after around 5 hours of play. The game needs more maps in its rotation to break up the monotony. The game gets tiring quite quickly in my experience, and my time with the game has almost ended after around 20 hours of playtime. Which, for those who are familiar with Chivalry, you will know that that is not a lot. The foundations of the game are set, polished, and fundamentally perfect. However, the toxic community, the lack of maps and game modes such as 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, etc., and the boring gameplay loop cause at least myself to give up on the game quite quickly. If you want a medieval fighting game where strategy and tactics are the forefront of the game, then For Honor and Chivalry are much better titles and are much more worthy of your time and money. I hope you all enjoyed my review. It was quite critical, it was quite harsh, but it is simply not as great as it could have been. There is such a clear lack of care by the developers, just slowly, extremely slowly putting content in the game, and it's not coming fast enough. The game is dying, and For Honor, a 3-4 year old game, has just as many players as this brand new IP. And I think that speaks volumes for how great this game actually is.